to call this 31st meeting of the Research Bureau to order. My name is John Spillane. I serve as the chair of the board of the Research Bureau. It's a pleasure to have so many people with us here this afternoon. Looking forward to hearing from our featured guest. But before we do that, we have some business that we need to attend to. My job is to greet you and to tell you a little bit about the Research Bureau. We were founded 31 years ago by business and community leaders to provide a resource for our region as it faced change and development. This organization provides the facts, the analytics, and the foundation for discussion about the future of our region. We collaborate with many organizations in order to develop informed recommendations for pending policy decisions. We are an independent, nonpartisan research and analysis organization. We have the specific mission of promoting informed public debate and decision-making as the greater Worcester region deals with its issues and challenges. The organization seeks to help our decision makers to solve real problems. We work to inform individuals and businesses and leaders about local issues that demand local attention. While our focus is on local decision making and implementation, the issues we touch upon often span across all levels of government. The theme for this year's annual meeting is All Politics is Local. What happens in Worcester matters, and what happens nationally matters to Worcester. You will hear more about this theme during our program this afternoon. And now on to the business portion of our meeting, and I'm going to call upon our distinguished clerk, Attorney Dee Moskos of the law firm of Myrick O'Connell, to seek approval of the minutes from our meeting last year. Dee?
Thank you. In your packet are the minutes from the June 9th, 2016 meeting. Hopefully you had a chance to look at them. Is there any motion? Motion approved. Seconded? Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you.
I have the pleasure of serving the Research Bureau along with my vice chair, Brian W. Thompson, who is the president and chief executive officer of Commerce Bank. As you know, our organization is funded by individuals, businesses, and foundations here in central Massachusetts, and we are so grateful for all the support. In particular, we want to single out Commerce Bank, as you can see from the stage and inside of our annual report. Commerce Bank is our presenting sponsor of this 31st meeting. Over the years, our friends at Commerce Bank have been so generous in their support of this organization, as well as many other organizations in this community. Partners like Commerce Bank support and validate the work that we do. And I would like to invite my vice chair, Brian Thompson, to welcome you on behalf of our presenting sponsor, Commerce Bank. Brian?
Good afternoon and welcome. Another nice day in Worcester. It's great to see so many of you here who have joined us this afternoon. I know that Mayor Petty will be with us shortly. Senator Chandler, I think, was going to be here, and other local leaders, community leaders, guests, and of course to our speaker, the Honorable John Sununu. This is the most interesting period in our country's history. The presidential election is so different than those of the past, and there are so many historical firsts. One candidate is the first woman to lead the presidential ticket for a major party, and the other candidate has never been elected to public office. The last debate was the most watched presidential debate in American history, with 84 million people tuning in. We all have many differing views about the election, but whoever you vote for, and we hope that you surely do vote, and think should be our next president, you should admit that it is refreshing that 84 million people in this country have an interest in the political process and the future of our country. We at Commerce Bank are delighted to again be the presenting sponsor of this year's annual meeting. We've had some interesting speakers in the past, and that tradition continues with our speaker today, the Honorable John H. Sununu. As for Commerce Bank, Duddy Massid and our chairman and I, along with the Commerce Bank team, continue to prosper as a regional financial institution. We have grown to over $2 billion in asset size. Our leader in deposit market share in the city of Worcester, our leaders in our community, and we're a large corporate lender to so many businesses in our region and between here and Boston. We have 13 offices in central Massachusetts with 3 in Boston, along with an extremely talented team, and are well positioned for future growth and prosperity. To the sponsors and the contributors to today's events, thank you again for your support of the Research Bureau. It's a remarkable organization, and with talented staff who produces reports which are meaningful, helpful to our leaders, and bring together various constituencies for informed discussion and debate. It is for that reason that Commerce Bank has been such a strong and long-term supporter. A special thank you to Tim McGurthy, who is our leader, for your excellent work and for the leadership you bring to our organization, and of course to Attorney John Spillane for his leadership of our board as well. So welcome and thank you, and we look forward to the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
And it's my pleasure to call upon Karen Duffy, who is the president of Worcester Credit Union. Karen is the immediate past chair of the Research Bureau, a member of the executive committee, and also the chair of the nominating committee. So she will present the nominating committee report.
Okay. Thank you, John. Good evening, everyone. The nominating committee report, the officers to serve one term, Chairman John Spillane, Vice Chairman Sandra Dunn, Treasurer George Tetler, Clerk Dee Moscas. The Executive Committee to serve a 3-year term, Mike Mulrain and Brian Thompson. To serve a 2-year term, Karen Duffy, Abraham Haddad, Robert Johnson, Deborah Penta, Richard Powell, and Janice Yost. To serve a 1-year term, Gail Flanders Weiss. Joining us this year on the board will be Paul Belcito, Ted Borden, David Crouch, Don Doyle, Kurt Isaacson, Tarek Elseway, Chris Powers, Michael Robbins, and Ann Tripp. Renewing for a 3-year term, we have a long list, and I believe it is up on one of the screens here. We do want to thank those board members who are leaving us this year for their efforts and their service to the organization. That concludes my report. May I have a motion to accept the nominations report? So moved. And a second? Okay. All in favor? So voted. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and congratulations to those who have been elected. We look forward to working with you on this board of directors. Before I introduce Tim to say a few words as the executive director, I do want to just recognize we have a lot of partners, a lot of folks that support us, that believe in our mission, and first and foremost, our board of directors. We have a board of directors and an executive board and officers that really put the extra time in this organization. The executive committee meets monthly. The board meets 4 times a year. We are not shy in calling upon board members, and they lend their time, their treasure, and their talent to this organization. So I would just ask that board members, executive committee members, and officers just stand to be recognized, please, and if you could give them your applause. Thank you so much. I would encourage you to review the annual report, and in particular to look at all of our sponsors. These businesses that serve as our sponsors recognize the good work that we do. Their support in this endeavor is so much appreciated, and we as an organization are grateful to have them on board with us. I also want to recognize Sandy Dunn and her team here at the DCU Center. They always provide a phenomenal venue for us, and we have a collation afterwards which is put on by Sandy and her team. And I just think this is a wonderful place to come meet and to have so many of you present. I also want to point out, I want to recognize Penta Communications and its president, Deborah Penta. Her organization does the annual report, maintain the website, all of our marketing materials. She is really in charge of us communicating our message to you, and so we're so thankful to Deborah and her team. Also, on the accounting side, I want to recognize the accounting firm of Greenberg, Rosenblatt, Cull, and Pistoli, and especially Rick Powell and Shelley Truitt, who work tirelessly to provide invaluable accounting services for this organization all year long. And I'd be remiss if I did not recognize the Telegram Gazette, who's our media sponsor. When I came in tonight, I asked him, I said, is the governor here yet? And because I didn't see him, and he said, oh, he's down below having a meeting with the Telegram Gazette. And I wasn't aware of that, so I hope it went well, Governor. Yeah, I guess when we read it tomorrow, we'll. I also want to thank all of our local foundations, businesses, and individuals who have supported this organization throughout the year, and they are listed on page 15 through 17 of the annual report. So the list is too long to mention everybody, and I want to keep the meeting going quickly. But thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you for your support. And finally, I do want to recognize Assumption College. As many of you know, the Research Bureau is housed at Assumption College on the campus. The president of Assumption College, Francesco Cesareo, is not here. He and his board are in Italy. But Dan DiTullio is here from Assumption. I think we have some other folks. So we just want to recognize Assumption College for their commitment to the Research Bureau, and thank you so much. It's now my pleasure to introduce our Executive Director, Timothy J. McGurthy, who leads this organization. He's going into his third year as the leader. Tim and his staff and his research interns at Assumption and Holy Cross really work behind the scenes to make, to run the organization, to turn out the product, the research, to perform the analytics, and really to keep us uniquely positioned to have an impact. So it's my pleasure to introduce Tim.
Thank you very much. As John Adams stated, facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passion, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. According to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, a fact is something that truly exists or happens, something that has actual existence, and a true piece of information. Our democracy and our nation was founded and built on the importance of facts. In fact, in 1776, when the original 13 colonies determined to separate from Great Britain, their Declaration of Independence outlined facts submitted to a candid world to illustrate clearly and completely the rationale for birthing a new nation. Yet we live in an age where the term post-factual regularly makes headlines. Media sources across the country and the globe have lamented the rise of a post-factual era, a period when reality does not dictate public position or policy. Such outlets as the Washington Post, The Economist, the National Review, and the Financial Times have all explored issues of governance and politics in a post-truth era. An online platform, PolitiFact, has received a Pulitzer Prize for its efforts to fact-check the comments of public figures. Facts are important, and the Research Bureau has spent 31 years offering facts to Greater Worcester for information, for deliberation, and for a foundation of good public policy. We have gone further to explore, connect, and lay out the pattern of these facts. We have engaged the experts who understand the facts and have identified successful paths forward for cities like Worcester. We reject the premise that government at any level can succeed under a post-factual mindset. Our theme this year is All Politics is Local. We recognize that the national debates are influenced by, and in turn influence, the local approach to local challenges. Worcester is a microcosm of the issues that face this country. How do we embrace new residents? How do we create economic opportunity? How do we ensure public safety and promote public health? How do we educate our children and instill our values? How do we ensure equal treatment for all? Understanding the facts is the first step. Worcester has many successes: a growing population, a declining unemployment rate, a rising median household income, and an expanded tax base. We also have many challenges: too much embedded poverty that disproportionately impacts certain neighborhoods and certain racial and ethnic groups, an aging building stock, a student body in which 40% of its members struggle with the English language, a perception of public safety that deters engagement with the city and its residents. Incredibly, some cities across America are literally burning. Worcester, luckily, is not one of those cities. But the questions that tear those cities apart are the same in Worcester. We need to do a better job to understand the problems and identify the solutions. While it's foolishness to say what happens to cities on the other side of the globe could never happen locally, it is recklessness to say that what happens in Detroit, Ferguson, Flint, Orlando, Dallas, or Charlotte could never happen here. In order to address these challenges, we need to understand them. The Research Bureau will continue to work with government officials, civic leadership, the business and philanthropic communities, and our renowned higher education institutions to identify the problems and discover the solutions. Without you, the Research Bureau could not do this work. You have ensured that over the decades, we have not only survived, but thrived as a critical voice in Worcester's civic life. We have many to thank for that success. We're honored that our board of directors is a who's who of Worcester's business, education, and civic life. As John said, they commit their time, their resources, and their intellect to inform our mission and facilitate our efforts. Month after month, our executive committee, led by John, highlights issues and provides wise counsel to the staff. I'm truly grateful for your ongoing support and commitment to the Research Bureau in the cause of informed public policy and decision making. We cannot praise our financial sponsors enough. In our annual report, as mentioned, you'll see a listing of the many businesses, institutions, and individuals that provide invaluable support to our efforts. Our contributors represent the strength of the financial, legal, health, educational, industrial, insurance, real estate, and logistical organizations that make up Greater Worcester. I can't help but note a few that deserve special recognition. Commerce Bank has been our presenting sponsor for 8 years, worthy of a round of applause. Many thanks to Duddy Masad, Brian Thompson, and Mike Crawford for their continuous support for and involvement in our efforts. Greenberg, Rosenblatt, Cullen, Bitzoli has been an integral part of the Research Bureau's operations for decades and provides incomparable accounting work on our behalf week after week. As mentioned, Penta Communications has given the Research Bureau a loud digital voice that lets us share the lessons we've learned well beyond our geographic borders. We receive calls from organizations across the country that read about our efforts online and engage with us to understand how our region has addressed the challenges that they share. I also want to acknowledge our media sponsor, the Telegram and Gazette, celebrating its 150th anniversary, and the DCU Center, organizations that work with us on multiple events and multiple fronts. Finally, Worcester is very fortunate to have a strong philanthropic community. The Alden Trust, Daniels, Ellsworth, Fletcher, Fuller, Harrington, Health Foundation of Central Massachusetts, Hoche Schofield, McAvoy, Stoddard, Wyman Gordon, and the Greater Worcester Community Foundation have supported our efforts over the years and have ensured that Worcester is the smallest city in the nation to boast a policy research organization. Thank you, each and every one of you, for your commitment to our organization and to our mission. We value the trust you have placed in our efforts and impact. We will continue to work hard to earn it. With that, I also want to thank the staff of the Research Bureau. While a small nonprofit, the skills and dedication of the staff over the years has enabled the Research Bureau to do great things. I highlight the contributions of our new program associate, Eric Nealand, and our research associate, Mary Beth Burke. I also want to highlight the contributions of Jean D'Aso, who retired this year after nearly 2 decades with the Research Bureau. For those of you who knew her, you understand we miss her energy and enthusiasm, but we wish her well in her new travels. I also want to commend our interns, primarily from Assumption College and Holy Cross, who play an integral role in keeping our output strong. Returning to the words of John Adams, facts are stubborn things. He said those lines during his successful defense of the British soldiers accused of murder during the Boston Massacre. For one of the colony's most ardent revolutionaries, he defended those soldiers because he knew that the facts of the case, the evidence in front of the court, mattered. Many years later, he said, "The part I took in defense of Captain Preston and the soldiers procured me anxiety and obloquy enough. It was, however, one of the most gallant, generous, manly, and disinterested actions of my whole life, and one of the best pieces of service I ever rendered my country. Judgment of death against those soldiers would have been as foul a stain on this country as the executions of the Quakers or witches anciently. As the evidence was, the verdict of the jury was exactly right. We trust that our efforts to assemble the evidence and lay out the facts for Greater Worcester will allow our communities to tackle the issues of local policy and lay a foundation for national priorities exactly right as well." Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Brian Thompson had recognized a couple of our elected officials, and I just want to finish. There are a few that were not mentioned, and one is Senator Ryan Fatman, who is here. Senator Fatman. We also have Representative Kate Campanelli, who is here. And Representative Joseph McKenna. We welcome you. Also, I don't see her, but I think City Councilor Constantina Lukes is here as well, and I'd like to recognize her, Connie Lukes. I always do that at the risk of missing somebody and then being embarrassed after the fact, but hopefully we have everybody. If not, I have one more shot to make sure I introduce people. So it's now my distinct pleasure to introduce our honored guest. We're honored to have as our guest speaker, Governor John H. Sununu of Hampton Falls, New Hampshire. The governor has a storied background as an educator, an engineer, a small businessman, and a community and an international leader. He served as New Hampshire's 75th chief executive for 3 consecutive terms. He served 3 years as White House Chief of Staff to President George Herbert Walker Bush, overseeing daily operations of the White House and serving as a counselor and confidant to the President. Following his years in public service, he co-hosted CNN's Crossfire from 1992 to 1998, a current events debate program designed to highlight and challenge both liberal and conservative points of view. Governor Sununu attended the Massachusetts Institute of Technology at both the undergraduate and the graduate level, and he is a member of the National Academy of Engineering. In 2015, he authored The Quiet Man, the Indispensable Presidency of George H.W. Bush. He is currently president of JHS Associates of Hampton Falls, New Hampshire. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable John H. Sununu as our annual leader speaker.
Thank you very much, John. It is a pleasure to be here. I must admit I'm surprised the crowd is as large as it is, but thank you very much for coming. I received the request to talk a little bit about all politics is local. And I thought it was going to be a very easy thing to do. But as I was riding up here today and trying to figure out what I was going to say, it dawned on me it really is harder than I thought it was going to be. Harder for a number of reasons. First of all, I'm not sure it applies anymore. And secondly, I am positive it has to apply. And so what I'll try and do today is talk a little bit about that, try and give it a little bit of a historical context, and then about 2/3 of the way through that, maybe halfway through that, I'm going to do a quick rope-a-dope and talk a little bit about presidential leadership and how that affects things locally. First of all, my compliments to the Research Bureau. I find it paradoxical that in this era, where with the internet, we have all the facts we want at our fingertips, that the technology that gives us that also facilitates a lot of garbage being promulgated. I call it Gresham's law of the internet. All good data is being forced out by bad data. And I urge you to understand that reality as you try and communicate what you know to be the facts into a world where more and more I am convinced important decisions are being made based on ignorance and legend and myth and whatever is politically convenient at the time. So you have a good responsibility, an important responsibility, but it's not going to get easier. It's going to get harder. I said I didn't think that all politics is local applies so much today. And again, I think it's for the same reason I mentioned relative to the quality of data and facts that people are using. There's no such thing as local anymore. Local isn't local. To a great extent, a presentation like this, that would be a presentation to the 300 or 200 of you that are here, would have been a local presentation. But today, with technology and your phones and the propensity for people to want to communicate with where they are, and Twitter and Facebook, live online, as I am talking, my speech could possibly be no longer local. And certainly at least 2 or 3 lines would be sent across the Twitter sphere. And whatever I do here could, if I put my foot in my mouth, as I often do, end up being a national or an international issue. So there really is no local anymore. On top of that, we have events that are no longer local anymore. Ferguson was not local. In a matter of minutes, Ferguson was not local. And certainly there are politics involved in issues and situations like that. What happens in state elections are in a way local, but in so much of a way no longer local, because virtually all fundraising today is national. We have a Senate race in New Hampshire. Senator Ayot's running for re-election. Our current governor, Maggie Hassan, is running against her. The numbers I see is that the Democrats will spend $50 million to unseat Kelly Ayotte, and she will spend $50 million to hold her seat. There is no way that fundraising is local. So, what do we mean when we say politics is local? Or what did we mean when we said politics is local? That phrase is most in the modern world attributed to Tip O'Neill, who actually wrote a book with that title. In a way, even in Tip's day, local politics wasn't local. Tip had a solid seat. He didn't have to worry about whatever he did influencing the politics of his campaigns. He didn't have to worry about what he did influencing his capacity to be reelected. But what he did in a constructive way, and what most good political figures do, is understand that they are there not only to act on policy or create legislation, but they are there to be a responder to constituent needs. I was trying to think on the way up of an example of a classic figure in history that might have been the best representative of the phrase, politics is local. And I thought of James Michael Curley, mayor of Boston. James Michael Curley served 4 terms as mayor in Boston. The interesting thing is that none of those terms were consecutive. He served a term, not in office, served a term, not in office, served a term, not in office. I admit, I don't know if that was the rules of the day or the insanity of the politics. The last time he was elected while sitting in jail under indictment for a felony. But James Michael Curley really understood what in those days politics is local really meant. He was famous for going to wakes and funerals. And I don't know if the story I remembered on the way up here was a response that he gave or one of his aides gave, but when somebody asked why he went to funerals when he could walk down the street of Boston and run into 10 times as many people in the same amount of time, his explanation, in a way, to me, is what is really meant when people think they're talking about politics as local, what they are really trying to say. And Curley's explanation was the following. He went to wakes and funerals as a gift to the family, as a honoring of the deceased, so that the family could then say, the mayor came to Uncle Frank's wake. It honored his constituents. And what it did, it grows, when you do something like that, the message and the contact and the credibility and if you will, the embracing of the political figure under circumstances like that spreads like wildfire. So all politics is local really means when political figures deal with their constituents' needs and give back to their constituents. Now, certainly it also means they might make policies and laws or pass legislation which affects their constituencies. And certainly we know that in the modern world, a lot of what happens in politics is a you scratch my back, I'll scratch you back set of relationships in Congress where one back is one locality and the other back is another locality. And as I was driving, I thought of the one time in history when it was so important that politics not be local. In May of 1787, after the Revolutionary War Tim referred to, the colonies had come together, having kicked England out. They came together under the Articles of Confederation, a very loose compact, in which they were trying to act as a nation under a federation with rules that really weren't strong. They realized if they were to succeed, they had to have a much better, a much stronger binding relationship. So they all agreed to go down to Philadelphia in May of 1787, but they all went with local instructions. The large states said, don't let the small states get too much. The agriculture states said, don't let the manufacturing states get too much, and vice versa. The coastal states had one set of perspectives on what had to be done versus the inland states. The North versus the South, the slave states versus the non-slave states. There were about a dozen different divisions across all kinds of lines for those 13 colonies, and they all had specific instructions on what they should do and not do in terms of amending the Articles of Confederation. What happened when they got to Philadelphia is amazing. There's a book by a lady called Catherine Drinker Bowen entitled The Miracle in Philadelphia, and it truly was a miracle. Those delegates who were tough people, they had just kicked England off the continent. They were survivors in the tough political world of their colonies, where politics was tough. You should see the nasty language in tracts of that time. But the fact is, they arrive in Philadelphia, they start talking about all their differences and how they're going to settle these things, and all of a sudden, it dawns on them, without using this phrase, they cannot let their politics be local. They had to come together and make decisions on a global sense, on a national sense. And in about 90 days, the summer in Philadelphia, they start with a clean sheet of paper and write the Constitution. Unbelievable. And when they leave, they know they have to go back to their states, their colonies that are now about to become states, and convince everybody there for whom politics is still local, that they haven't given the store away. One time in history where, thank God, people didn't think in terms of politics is local, that changed not only the course of this nation, but the course of the world. Now, having said that, what do we think about in the modern world? Well, I really do believe that elections are interactive in the sense that the candidates for president will determine how good or how tough a campaign, back in my state, Kelly Ayotte will have. I know you don't have any very significant down-ballot elections here, so let me use New Hampshire as the example. I, as somebody who watches politics, and as a father, I'm concerned as what impact the presidential campaign will have on that wonderful candidate running for governor in New Hampshire, named Chris Sununu, who I think represents the best example of the power of good breeding stock. But it's true. A great deal of what Kelly will end up doing in her race against Governor Hassan, or Chris will do in his race for the governorship, will depend on the mood of the country a little less than 5 weeks from now, in terms of whether people will be even in the mood to go out and vote. We've all seen the data indicating that both the Republican nominee and the Democratic nominee have the highest negatives of any presidential nominees in any of our memories. How does that get handled? It impacts local politics. It will impact the Senate race. It will impact the governor's race. It will impact the state Senate races and the legislative races and the municipal, the town races. So there is that relationship in terms of politics still having a local interaction. But the domination of the headlines look at, right now, 90% of the headlines refer to the national issues. And the capacity of the internet to carry fact and garbage becomes a tremendous component of what is going on in this political environment. Now this is where I do my rope-a-dope. I'm going to talk a little bit about presidential leadership, because I believe, to some extent, we have forgotten that presidential leadership can impact everything, including what happens locally, and sometimes especially what happens and what transitions take place at the local level. I had the great privilege to work for a president as chief of staff that I think history is continually recognizing as having been a much more significant, much better president than the press allowed us to think of him when he left office. George Herbert Walker Bush, the 41st President of the United States. Interesting fact, George Bush served as president with a House dominated by the Democrats, 260 to 175, right? 85 vote margin for the Democrats. A Senate dominated by the Democrats by 55-45. And I'm not trying to be partisan here, I'm trying to explain that politics has a partisan component to it. With that, George Bush passed more great domestic legislation than any president except Lyndon Johnson or Franklin Roosevelt in one term. The Budget Bill, the Clean Air Bill, the Civil Rights Bill, the Americans with Disabilities Act, energy reform legislation, crime reform legislation, the list goes on and on and on. Proposed, passed, and signed by a president who, by the way, was a little bit occupied on other things called the Gulf War and the collapse of the Soviet Union. So let me talk about 4 instances that I think presidential leadership was important, and presidential leadership, national politics, eventually had a huge impact on what happens locally, what happens to us as individuals. The first issue is the Gulf War. Got to set the stage again, remind you what the country was at the time in 1991. The country was still possessed by the post-Vietnam syndrome. We had not really exercised power as the last superpower since Vietnam. And the mood of the country was thought to be still opposed to military action by the U.S. Last day of July, first day of August 1991, the message comes to George Bush that Saddam Hussein has invaded and immediately occupied Kuwait. Big country invades and takes the freedom away from its small neighbor. It wasn't a trivial event in terms of international economy. Between the two of them, they had about 25 or 28%, I don't remember the correct number, of the world's supply of oil. And as the world sat contemplating, A, the loss of freedom in Kuwait, and B, the impact on the economy, the president had to formulate a strategy. At the time, by the way, that we were in the midst of a very partisan battle with Congress over the budget agreement. George Bush made spent a little bit of time talking to his advisors, Brent Scowcroft, Jimmy Baker, myself, brought in quickly some folks from the diplomatic side, got on the phone with Margaret Thatcher, with Mitterrand, with Kohl, and in about 24 or 30 hours, he had made up his mind. He was not going to let Hussein stay in Kuwait. This aggression shall not stand. He drew a red line in the sand, so to speak, and said, we will not give up until Hussein is kicked out of Kuwait. And he knew that if he drew that line, he would have to live up to it. What did he do? Personal diplomacy. First of all, he took a great chance. He had put his political capital on the line. He had no idea if the American public would support any action to kick Hussein out of Kuwait. The mood of the country for the last 15 or 20 years had been absolutely opposed to using U.S. might to accomplish any diplomatic end. And then, as the process goes on, he realized that it would be important to do this as a coalition. And he started building a coalition. And the amazing thing about this first serious coalition, post-World War II, are some of the components in it. Yes, he eventually got Thatcher and Mitterrand and Kohl, major countries, leaders of the major countries in Europe to join. But think about it. He got the Soviet Union to join. The Soviet Union and the US had not done anything in concert since World War II. And then he got virtually all of the Arab nations to join in a coalition against another Arab nation. And finally, as part of that, he got Syria, which was being run by the father of the current Assad, who certainly was a tougher cookie than even his son, to be part of the coalition. Now, quick history. George Bush had the patience to build up our resources. We spent 6 months sending the resources over there. And then finally, when the shooting started, in about 100 hours, Saddam had been kicked out of Kuwait. And what did Bush do? He was smart enough to know he was not going to get caught in this quagmire, in the quicksand of occupation. And within about 3 months, we had our troops home. How does that affect us locally? There's no question that the price of oil locally was affected by not letting Saddam Hussein control Kuwait's oil. But more than that, it really changed the mood of the country in terms of being willing and recognizing the need that the United States, as the last superpower, had to be part of creating stability around the world. Was it an easy thing to do, to pull things together? It was not. When we started the process, there were only 35 votes in the Senate supporting any kind of military action. And it was a very partisan opposition to the president. George Mitchell was the Senate Majority Leader, and he made it known publicly he was not going to let his Democrats vote to support any action. George Bush sat down one-on-one with about 40 senators, and we finally got a vote of 52 senators to support the action. In every one of those meetings, he understood the local needs and the local problems and the local relationships that each senator had, and the mood of their electorate and the mood of the people they would have to go home to. And the one thing George Bush always was able to do was to put himself inside the shoes of those he was talking to. He put himself in their local position and tried to come to an accommodation to satisfy what he knew would be local pressure on them when he urged them to support his decision. Second example, the Civil Rights Bill. George Bush had a history of being a strong supporter of civil rights. In 1964, as a congressman out of Houston, out of Texas, which was still part of the Deep South, he voted to support a fair housing bill in Congress. Got tremendous back pressure, but he believed it was the right thing to do. Now he's President of the United States, and there is moving through Congress a piece of legislation, Civil Rights Bill, turns out to eventually be called the Civil Rights Bill of 1991. And it is a bad bill. It is a bill primarily being written by the trial lawyers, and everybody realized if this would pass and get signed by the president, we would have litigation in the business world to a fairly well. George Bush didn't want to be a president that vetoes a civil rights bill. We tried desperately to change it before it got passed by the House and Senate. We could not. George Bush said, "I've got to veto it." He became the only president in the country ever to veto a civil rights bill, but sent down immediately a piece of legislation that would guarantee the rights that we were trying to protect without creating the ambiguities that would open things up to legislation. That got passed pretty quickly. How does that affect locally? There's no question in my mind that every one of your businesses would have been operating differently today if that first piece of legislation had passed. Third example, Clean Air Bill. For 13 years, Clean Air Bill had been bottled up in Congress. 13 years. Bottled up primarily because a Democrat in the House, John Dingell, was, quote, protecting the auto industry, and a Democrat in the Senate, Senator Byrd, was protecting the coal industry. George Bush felt that the country needed this piece of environmental legislation, and so he made a dramatic proposal that he would propose a way that the funding for the bill would be shared differently than had historically been talked about. He understood that a bill that dealt with, for example, coal emissions would be devastating to the Midwest if there wasn't a sharing of payment in some way by those of us in New England who would benefit from the cleaner air. And he crafted a market-based solution, cap and trade. And cap and trade since then has gotten a bad name, but in fact cap and trade is a great tool when it's applied to the right emissions, which allows industry to reduce emissions at the lowest cost, and if it does more than its share in one area, they can share the benefits by selling the reductions to others in their industry. That bill was passed by a democratically controlled Congress and turns out to reduce emissions at 1/7 of the projected cost from when it was passed. How does that affect us locally? I can tell you, the environment in New England would not be as pristine as it is today without the impact of that legislation on nitrous and sulfurous oxides, dealing with acid rain and dealing with the other emissions that were flowing to us from the Midwest. The last one, and then I'll kind of close and open it up to questions. The collapse of the Soviet Union. Bush comes into office in 1989 after Ronald Reagan had built up the American defense structure, and the Soviet Union had a leader at the time, Gorbachev, who took one look, and Gorbachev had been in charge of agriculture in the Soviet Union and actually took a trip to the US and flew across the country. And the story I've heard is that he looked out the airplane windows and saw farmland in the US that amazed him. Both the extent and the yield convinced him that there was no way the Soviet Union could compete economically with the US. So Reagan started it, and Bush took up the mantle and in essence provided incentives by agreeing to start a reduction of US troops and US armor in Europe, incentives for Gorbachev to pull the Russian troops out of Eastern Europe and out of Germany. What seems to be taken for granted in that whole process is the problem George Bush had with our friends. He recognized that not only was it important to try and get the Soviets out from behind the Iron Curtain, but that there would be a tremendous advantage to Europe and the world if Germany was unified. East Germany and West Germany reunited. When he talked to Margaret Thatcher, he found a very reluctant partner. She and the rest of the Brits remembered what Germany had done about a half a generation earlier. When he talked to Mitterrand in France, he got even more of a negative reaction for the same reason. But George Bush sat down and expended personal political capital with them. And over time they agreed, and Germany was reunified, and in a most amazing way, Bush worked on Gorbachev, and the Soviets agreed to let a reunified Germany be part of NATO. unbelievable. There's no way anyone could have predicted it. And how does that impact us? That change opened up world markets. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the rest of the world all of a sudden was able to start moving towards free economies. And I'll venture a guess that at least half of the businesses in here are export-based because not only did the Soviet Union collapse, but Germany became unified, catalyzed a strong Europe, and helped open up world markets. So politics is local, it affects nationally, although not in the way I think people think. And politics at the national level has huge local impacts on our lives and our economies and our families. It's a tough world. And so I suggest there are things we can do locally. The most important single influence in politics is us, is we. I guess that's the appropriate way, grammatically correct, is we. We have the capacity to talk to our family and our friends. That's where the real local action takes place. When you sit down with a coworker, or you sit down after golf and you're having a beer with the other guys and you're talking politics, or whether you're calling your grandmother or your grandkids to talk to them about how they're going to vote. When we talk politics to those who respect us, that's where the real action at the local level takes place. So my message to people when they say, what do you think of politics as local? My answer is, it really is, and in order to be part of that, you've got to talk, 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 talk. I will open it up to questions or go away quietly, whichever you prefer. Thank you very, very much. Do you want to pick up, John, so I don't get in trouble? I can't have left you questionless. I won't look, how's that? Madam Counselor, how are you? Thank you for coming,
I wouldn't miss it.
and thank you for staying awake.
When you said politics shouldn't be local, we have a rule in the city council that says we should direct our attention only to those kinds of issues that directly impact our constituents, like removal of snow, dog parks, and not on the war in Syria or the transfer of the internet. Are you saying that on a local level discussion, especially by city councils and boards of selectmen, should be directed to other issues?
No, not at all. There's an appropriateness that is crucial. But certainly what you do on those local issues affect more than just Worcester. What you do in dealing with transportation through the city affects people who want to come here and visit. So you make a decision for Worcester, but it impacts more than locally. You make a decision on education. I don't know if the way you're structured, whether the council handles education or it's a separate board, but when that board makes a decision on Worcester's education, it determines who comes here and who doesn't come here. So I'm not saying you should have your discussions on things that are other than local, but I am saying no, when you make those decisions, they don't just affect what happens within your boundaries. And we all know that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
The partisanship in the country is so extreme as to be scary. Do you think that there's a role for the president, or could the right president begin to heal that partisanship?
The country doesn't get unified, nor does anything get done in Washington without real presidential leadership. Franklin Roosevelt showed that, John Kennedy showed that, Ronald Reagan showed that, George H.W. Bush showed that. And it doesn't require you to have a Congress that is your own party. Presidential leadership is the key to breaking gridlock. And when gridlock exists, it's the president's fault, whatever party that happens to be at the time. So yes, if we get a president that understands that, I think you will be amazed. Most of the people go to Washington wanting to do things. They don't want to waste years of their life without having credit for having accomplished something. But the president has to spend his or her political capital. You have to be willing to take the backlash. When George Bush accepted taxes in the 5-year budget, he wasn't naive. He understood he was going to take hell for it. But the country needed it, and so he spent his capital. When he decided to send troops over there to get Hussein out, he had no idea whether the country would rise up in arms against him. But he spent his political capital. As soon as you get a president, man or woman, that's willing to spend their political capital, this country changes on a dime.
I was interested to learn of your engineering background. Could you comment just a little bit on how that informed your career in politics?
Well, my PhD is in mechanical engineering. I dealt with a lot of chaos in thermodynamics, so it really was right up my alley. It did help. It really, you know, one of the engineering disciplines is take a complex problem, you break it down, you solve the pieces and you put it back together again. And believe me, when we did the Clean Air Bill, my engineering background was very important in trying to help the president understand what the give and take was, both economically and technology-wise. And so I think it's a great background for anybody who wants to go into public service. I have a son who's a U.S. Senator, was a U.S. Senator. He had a master's in engineering from MIT. I have a son running for governor. He has a degree in civil engineering from MIT. So it really, I think, is important to get a variety of professions in the policy-making process of the country. Sir.
I think we all appreciate the glimpse behind the curtain. So as Chief of Staff, you certainly played an integral role in the bills that you mentioned in international diplomacy. Which did you personally find most challenging and most gratifying?
You mean governor or chief of staff or you know, I had fun. I really did. As governor, I found out that this legend that you can't do things is garbage. All you gotta do is be willing to stick your neck out, say what you want to get done, and get people to work with you, and you can. And we rebuilt all of the institutional facilities in New Hampshire. When I was governor, we initiated a process called the 10-year highway plan, which is still in place. We generated 6 surplus budgets after the state had been in financial disaster for a while. It's fun to make things work. And so I love that, and I had the great privilege of working for a president that I had a ball working for. One of my cherished possessions, which I will never release to the public, are the obscene limericks he used to write at meetings when he was listening to the long, dull speeches of his presidential colleagues at NATO or whatever. I mean, we had a good time. So they were both different, and to differentiate between the two, it's like saying, which one of your kids do you like better? You love them both in different ways or all in different ways. They were different challenges, but I really felt privileged to be there. I never intended to be in politics. I got in by accident, and the good Lord has been good to me in getting me into a place that I really ended up enjoying. But I don't differentiate. My poor wife had to put up with all of it.
Wherever one sits on the political spectrum, it's easy to look at the slate of candidates for office and think, is this really the best we can do? What can I do to help change the landscape such that we can recruit candidates for office that I can be proud to vote for?
The problem you ever have with candidates, not just this time, any time that goes through a primary process, is not the candidates, it's the voters. So you've got to talk, and discuss what the issues are and what the characteristics are of what you and your circle would feel would be a better choice. And you have to be proactive. You know, we have gotten to a point where the political correctness police have stopped us from talking. Thank God I was born with a gene that doesn't let me do that. But in a way, there's a generation out there for whom discourse and debate and constructive arguing, there is nothing wrong with arguing 2 points of view, and you don't even have to come to an agreement. You just have to let the person on the other side hear your point of view, and you have to listen to theirs. And somehow when you go home and go to sleep, the impact of it processes over time. So I really believe in talk. Be part of the discourse. Encourage people to express their concerns and talk about them. It is a difficult time. In an odd way, what I said at the beginning, the technology we have at hand, the internet, and all of those things that are built around the internet have allowed garbage to dominate over the good, and we've got to get it back the other way. And we can only do it by participating. I'll take 2 more. 1, 2.
I have the mic though. Over here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Governor, as a
I'll
sign
take 5 more. I don't care.
as a sign of your political leadership, and you were a blast on Crossfire, who are you going to vote for on November 8th?
Look, I'll give you a partisan answer if you'll forgive me for being partisan. I have said I will vote for the Republican nominee. I have recently expressed an endorsement of Mr. Trump, and when I'm asked why, I have said Mrs. Clinton has made it easy for me to do that. And I am worried that, and again, I'm a partisan Republican, but in my heart it is true too. I am worried that her favorite surrogates are an avowed socialist named Bernie Sanders and an unavowed socialist named Elizabeth Warren. And this country is drifting, I'm not afraid to use the word, towards socialism. Free schools, single-payer, government-controlled health care, regulations that put a reach of government into the private sector and in some cases almost control the business. I'm afraid that what I believe is the wrong way is now sliding down a slippery slope. So yes, like everybody here, you know, we have some concerns about whatever candidate we support. But I'm a great believer that it's a binary decision, and at some point, you got to drift from those that are enthusiastic supporters to not so enthusiastic supporters to so supporters. You got to attract even the people that say, I'm going to hold my nose and vote. But we got to participate in the problem. It's a binary decision. You got to go whichever way you feel. You should go out and vote for either Trump or Clinton. But to vote otherwise is a non-vote. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much for a very informative talk. I was wondering, should, in light of the selection process this time, the way it worked, should the Republican Party revise its rules so that they bring back superdelegates, or in some way go back to the mixed system that we had at one time of a combination of primaries and party people having more influence over who gets selected?
You've asked the right question. I don't have the right answer. I think that's something the party has to think about in terms of process. I think both parties have to review process in light of what I call, I'm very serious. I think technology has had an impact in a very short period of time. And so short a period of time where neither we as individuals nor parties as parties have been able to cope with the impact of that change. And I think people have to understand that it is different today than it was 20 years ago, and what are our party rules. And I don't know the right answer, but I do agree that you've asked the right question. Thank you all very, very much.
Governor, we really appreciate your spending time with us today and sharing your thoughts. Most interesting, a lot to talk about. I know there were other questions. I apologize for having to cut the questions short, but we do have a very nice reception for you outside the doors. I do want to, because the governor recognized his wife, I'd like to welcome also Nancy Sununu, who's here with the governor, came down from Hampton Falls. Mother of two MIT graduates. That's pretty impressive. So, three graduates. Very impressive. I also, before we close, we have been joined by a few additional elected officials. I'd like to recognize State Representative Peter Durant, who is here. Peter Durant, and also State Representative Kevin Kouros. And our distinguished Sheriff of Worcester County, Sheriff Lou Evangelitis, is also joining us. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge our former Executive Director, the great Roberta Schaefer, who's here, and ask the Governor a question. And with that, we will entertain a motion to adjourn. A second? All those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you.